Have you ever felt totally sucked into a book? It's like you started it and you could not put it down until you got to the end. Well, a lot of that has to do with pacing. Hi, I'm Carly Stevens. This channel is all about being an indie author, so writing, publishing, and indie author life. Today I wanted to talk to you about pacing, what it is, what it isn't, and just some practical tips about how you can employ better pacing in your own work. So first of all, what is pacing? I think there's a misconception about pacing, meaning that something has to be fast-paced. That is not actually the case. Bad pacing is when things are uneven, you have boring sections, you really lose the reader instead of pulling them from the beginning all the way to the end of your story. That can happen in something that is fast-paced, breakneck. That can happen in something that is slower, but you just keep coming back for more, keep coming back for more. So regardless of the kind of book that you're writing, you want good pacing, which is just that ability to take the reader from the beginning to the end in like a riptide. You know, they can't escape the goodness of your story. So some questions to ask yourself if you feel like the pacing is not quite right, or you're losing readers, or you're losing yourself. Here are some things that you can ask yourself to see, are you on track for good pacing? Number one, do your characters have agency? So are things just happening to them, around them, or do their decisions actually affect what's going on? This was one of the issues that my stories had when I was just starting out, you know, maybe a freshman in high school. Parts of the story would be fine, but then parts would just happen to the characters rather than having the characters have any say or real effect on what was going on. So obviously there are things that are going to happen to your characters, but agency, their ability to make decisions and affect what's going on is crucial to having good pacing. Number two, are the goals and stakes clear? Do we know what they're going after? Do we know what the characters want? And do we know what's at stake if they don't get it? Again, this is not to say that a book has bad pacing if the stakes aren't world-shattering or anything like that. Instead, the stakes can be internal. That's perfectly fine, but we need to have a sense of what people are going after and what's at stake if that doesn't come to pass over the course of your story. Number three, do you have question loops open? So are there things that you have not answered? Are there things that you've teased, secrets that you know are there? Basically, are there questions that do not yet have answers that are going to take your reader from this chapter to the next one? What do they want to know? What do you want to know going forward? So make sure that you haven't closed all of those and answered too many questions. You want your readers to be oriented in your world. Obviously, you don't want them to be confused, but you also want them to constantly be wanting more answers, more information, more scenes that you've kind of teased might be coming up. That's number three. Number four, do you have a mix of action and reaction scenes? Sometimes poor pacing is the result of only one or only the other. So with certain genres, you can get away with more of just action, 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 action. Some middle grade books can get away with that. Some thrillers certainly can get away with that. But for most genres, you don't just want only action piled on action. You want breaks, pauses with reaction so that you can have an emotional response to something that has just happened. Sometimes people lean too far the other way too. It's all interiority, it's all thoughts. There's really not a lot that's happening. It's just people kind of sitting around thinking. And again, there are certain genres where that can, you know, leaning more that way can work when done properly. But For most stories, having some action and some reaction is going to really enhance your pacing because things are happening and we know why they matter. All right, so some tips to create good pacing. Once you've answered those questions, here are a few just practical things that you can do to improve your pacing. Number one, the more I've done this and observed this and, watched videos about it, the truer it seems to be. Make sure that you've mixed up dialogue, description, action, and interiority or thoughts. A chapter should not just be one or the other. Again, unless you're doing something unusual or you have a very particular reason for just doing one, then there should be this beautiful mix. I recently did an exercise in the creative writing class that I'm teaching where I brought in pages from books that I think are well written, they have good pacing, and I had them highlight, okay, where's the action, where's the dialogue, where is the description, and where is that interiority, and in 4 different colors. And each page was just a rainbow. It kind of hopped back and forth because they complement each other, those 4 things. If you're just giving us one or the other, then chances are your pacing is not going to be on track because something feels off. Okay, second tip is use active voice. Active voice is a technical grammatical term for when the subject of the sentence is doing the action rather than having the action done to it. So, for instance, she rode the dragon would be in the active voice. The dragon was ridden by her would be in the passive voice. Sometimes what I see is passive voice, or just the use of to be verbs. She was sad, she was on the dragon, whatever it is. But using passive voice or too many to be verbs instead of active verbs in the active voice it's going to slow everything down. It's going to make your writing much less athletic, moving forward. Again, this does not mean that your chapters need to be action-packed. I've written in a variety of genres, but one of those is historical dark academia, and that requires this more complex, slower, immersive kind of sense. But I still wanted to use the active voice. I still wanted to use interesting verbs, and all of that helped to move the reader forward through the story and keep that pacing good, right? Taking your reader from the beginning to the end. So some technical verb things you can do there. I actually mentioned 2 if you were paying attention. So active voice, that's when the subject is doing the action instead of being acted upon, and interesting active verbs themselves instead of just to be, is, was, were, are. Okay, number 3, use paragraph breaks to your advantage. So there are lots of ways that this can look, but use paragraph breaks to your advantage. For instance, if somebody comes across something truly shocking, then make it stand out not only by describing it, but in the way that you break up your paragraphs. Consider your paragraphs, among other things, as camera shots. If you're the cinematographer of your story, what kind of effect do you want to have on the reader? What shots are you giving them? When are you switching from face to face? When are you doing a close-up? When are you just panning over? Maybe it's a longer paragraph, but use that to your advantage. Use white space to your advantage. If you start doing a lot of shorter paragraphs and there's white space on the side, then that will make your readers read faster. They won't necessarily know that that's happening, but it'll increase the speed and breathlessness of a scene. And so there are all these little tricks that you can use like that to control the reader experience of the action, of the shocking moment, of whatever it is that might be happening, and make it more immersive. And that immersiveness is going to be one of those elements that takes a reader from the beginning to the end because they feel like they're in it because of something as simple as a paragraph break. Along similar lines, vary the length and type of your sentences. So if you pay attention to books that you like, that do feel immersive and interesting and really take you from the beginning to the end in this just ruthless kind of way, then you'll notice that there are very short sentences, there are medium sentences, and then there are long, complex sentences that really build and build once people are prepared for those. Something that can slow your pacing down or even make it just grind to a halt. You know, the person closes the book, they don't really know why they're bored, but they are. It can be, one of the symptoms can be that all of your sentences are medium length and they just start with a subject. Subject, verb, object, medium length, medium length, medium length. It can start sounding monotonous without the reader really understanding why it's starting to feel monotonous, like a song on repeat. So again, it's something very simple. Anybody can vary the length of their sentences, and the sentence, when I say sentence types, I mean like sentence starters. So a lot of sentences, they begin with a subject. She rode the dragon, like my previous example. I am filming a video. That's perfectly fine, obviously. But if you're starting every sentence with a subject like that, it can build that monotony, especially when it's the same subject. If you're writing in first person, it's easy to begin every sentence with I, but that is, it gets boring. Consciously or subconsciously, it gets boring. So think about, all right, I could start with a prepositional phrase, on the cliff, above the clouds, through the forest. So you could start with something like that. One of my favorites, if I'm starting to fall into that rut of writing the same types of sentences, is using a participial phrase or participle. So a present participle is just a verb plus ing. I know I'm getting technical here, but you can handle it. You can do it. So verb plus ing, so running through the forest. Katniss escaped. Or singing to myself, I walked down the hallway. So that's what a participial phrase sounds like. But mix it up. Think about, you know, starting with just a description, an adjective, you know, red and I don't know. It looked like her face was going to explode. But consider, if there's a section that feels like it's just not really singing, mixing up the length of sentences and the way you begin them is a simple way to start fixing that problem. And I've seen this be a problem for younger writers, especially people who are starting out. It's easy to kind of write in this telling, you know, just telling the story way. But if you do this, then you can start to break away from that and instead make the story more intriguing, just sound more interesting. All right, and then finally, consider your scenes or your chapters. Each scene or chapter should start with some kind of hook and end with a button. So let me take those one at a time. Starting scenes with a hook, that does not mean that you need to be gimmicky. That doesn't mean that you need to, you know, have shock and awe every time. In fact, if you have that every time, people are not going to be shocked or awed after a while. Instead, there should be something interesting, like there's a reason you should read this scene. It's not just something else is happening. Start with dialogue, start with action, start with a beautiful description, start with something that entices the reader into that scene. So start with a hook, be very intentional about how you begin things, and then end with a button. I wasn't aware of that term button until I started listening to the Office Ladies podcast, all about The Office with Jenna Fisher and Angela Kinsey, which is just a delightful listen. By the way, I was one of their top listeners a couple of years ago. But anyway, a button is that moment right before a commercial break. So what is it that's going to make the viewer, the audience, hang on till the next scene, even if there's a commercial in between? So for a writer, there's a very similar concept, right? What is going to make people pick that story back up after they, if they have to stop and put a bookmark in? What is it that's going to cause them to hang in there? So a button can be a reveal, it can be a new question, it can be a kind of teaser for something to come, it can be something that makes you just love a character more, and so you're willing to hang in there with them. It can be a lot of different things, but make sure you give people a reason to come back. So if you combine that with the hook, whatever that hook is for the next scene, you have a button in the previous one, you have a hook in the next one, then a lot of readers are going to continue turning those pages. So good pacing is not just the breakneck speed of Percy Jackson. Good pacing can be the slow build of something that is just going to stick with the reader and make your reader stick with you. So I hope this was helpful. I know there are lots of other ways to create good pacing, so add your own down in the comments below. I'd love to hear you get in on this conversation. But thank you. Make sure that you subscribe, hit the notification button for more writing, publishing, and indie author life stuff. Until next time.